Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 35mm YouTube channel. I'm Mr. 50mm, but you can call me Chris. For today's video, we're just going to go over a couple things that I wish I'd known before embarking on my film scanning journey. This is kind of a summary of the collective experience over time that I've had with using dedicated film scanners. I'm obviously by no means an expert on the subject, as some of you may have seen from my sample galleries with film cameras. I'm not usually the greatest when it comes to the scanning of things. My images sometimes aren't the greatest. But this isn't necessarily about scanning technique or editing technique, but things I'd wish I'd known prior to setting up or getting set up for dedicated film scanning. And we're also going to talk about why I kind of like dedicated film scanners and why camera scanning, although very convenient, you haven't seen me use it that much. With that, let's get into it. Number one, film trays. If you're looking at an older film scanner, you may be tempted to do something like look at film scanners online that do not have film trays. Beware. I think I've mentioned this in the past. I'm almost certain I have. But a lot of the times, film trays tend to end up being hard to find and or end up being very expensive. Sometimes about as much money as what you dump into the film scanner. Now, this is not always the case, and this does require you to do a bit of homework if you are looking at a dedicated film scanner. If it comes with film trays, all the better. That's pretty great. But if it doesn't, you really don't have that many options. One thing you could do that has worked out for me was looking at trying to make your own film trays. This is the 3D printed film tray for my ScanDual 4. And the files are online, freely available, and they are good to go for 35mm negatives. The tray itself is not crazy to print. It's not the easiest print, but it's not super hard. It did take 23 hours though. But overall, it's worked out well. And there are other scanners that have 3D printable film trays as well. I believe the really popular ones, like the Coolscan series scanners, have some available if you look for them on your normal 3D printer repository sites, 3D printer file repository sites, places like Printables or Thingiverse. However, this isn't going to be the case for every film scanner. So, as I said, I found some for this, the MINOLTA ScanDual, and I believe this one also works with other ScanDual scanners. So it worked on my ScanDual 4, but I believe this was originally meant for or designed for the ScanDual 3. I'll post a link into the description below. But if you don't find that you can fabricate your own film trays, you really do have to do the math and figure out whether or not it is worth it for you to buy a film scanner without trays and then go through the hassle of buying trays or making trays, rather than just looking for one that has them to begin with. And I assume a lot of this kind of comes about from these things being pretty old, being basically computer accessories that kind of get forgotten, and therefore their bits get forgotten, because along with that, there's a lot of times that they get shipped as a film scanner only, no power plugs, no trays, just scanner, no discs or anything. On one of my newer purchases, this Canon FS4000S, I actually got pretty lucky. When I picked it up, the person actually had the cables, they had both trays, and actually had the disc with the serial number for Photoshop Elements 5, the software that came with it. So it was pretty convenient. But that's not always the case. Powering your film scanner. Another thing that comes up with older film scanners, as I'd mentioned just before, was if you end up looking for one that is used, there may be a chance that they will not come with a power adapter. Sometimes you get lucky, and with something like this, it's a fairly common computer cable. See that? That cable there? I got tons of these, but you may also get unlucky, and you might get one that doesn't come with one at all. And this is where, if you just get or look at the requirements for the power, you could probably actually, for the most part, power these using standard wall warts, or if you don't feel like figuring it out and figuring out which wall wart to buy, you can get one of those universal laptop power adapters with the corresponding plug, and if it has a voltage setting, just set it and forget it. I found that worked pretty well when testing some other film scanners before I bit the bullet and either fabricated a dedicated plug or looked to buy a proper wall wart. Software. This one is a bit tricky. Now, if you're going after a dedicated film scanner, you could always just get into the ViewScan ecosystem. This software, not sponsored by the way, seems to be able to make any film scanner work with modern operating systems. I assume they do it by collecting and modifying their own drivers on their own and having their own massive library in the program. This generally will work. I think they do have a list of scanners that they're compatible with, and it's pretty dang long. But if you're like me, you may be cheap. And getting a film scanner to run on its original software, if you have it or are looking for it, may be harder than you think. So you have to do one of two things. One, you might need to just have an old computer lying around. Something running something like Windows XP, maybe Windows 7 if it's new enough. And then just use that as your dedicated film scanning rig. I do have a computer for that, and it specifically runs the KONICA. This thing. And this is actually kind of annoying because had I known the KONICA didn't have anything that would really work with it, with anything newer than, I think, Windows XP, I probably wouldn't have gone for it. Because the other option is, before buying your film scanner, look up to see if anyone has figured out how to get it to work on modern operating systems, whether or not that's via modified drivers or really basically something like ViewScan. Now, for my other scanners, it turns out that they actually work on mostly modern operating systems. For example, the Coolscan 8000, when that was running, I had that running on a Windows 10 machine. The MINOLTA Scan Dual 4, Windows 10 machine. And the Polaroid Sprint Scan 4000 Plus, Windows 10 machine. Now, all of those that I just mentioned did require me to play around with the drivers, getting them to install on Windows 10 via basically a bit of security bypasses because they don't have the signed driver. So you have to get Windows to install it and ignore that check. Additionally, you had to do a couple other modifications and just basically create a text file to finagle the install. But generally, the programs actually run pretty well on modern OSs, which is kind of funky. So yeah, software can be an issue, and it's something to look into before you buy your scanner, because if you can't get it to run on your current hardware and you don't want to buy ViewScan, the only other option may be to get it into older hardware. A side effect of this is also ports. Along with the possible requirement for older software, you may need to look into things like Firewire cards. A lot of older scanners tend to support Firewire. Firewire. All right, this one's kind of funky because just recently Apple OS, I believe, dropped support for Firewire 400. May have also been 800. I'm not super sure. I'll figure it out and put a link below. Either way, this kind of spelled doom for some of the older scanners out there. And it's because, for some reason, a lot of old scanners like Firewire. Now, I assume this was because at the time, Firewire was a pretty dang fast kind of plug style. When it came out, I believe USB 1.1 was out, and Firewire 400 handles 400 megabits of data transfer per second. That's a lot compared to USB 1.1's 11. So when you're scanning big chunky images at 4000 DPI, the Firewire interface does make a notable difference. So I can see why they went for it. In the modern world, though, this does pose a problem. A lot of scanners, or a considerable number of them, came with either Firewire or USB. Sometimes something called SCSI. We're not going to get into that, but keep that in mind. You may need to accommodate that as well. And if it came with Firewire, you're not screwed, but things do get more complicated. This again goes down the path of, do you want to accommodate the plug by buying older hardware like an Apple computer that supports Firewire 400, or do you have a computer that can take a Firewire adapter card? For a desktop, I think this is not a huge problem because I believe there are still Firewire cards being made, but for a laptop, I actually ended up using a different solution, the Firewire to PCMCIA card slot adapter. And this actually worked pretty well. It works well for my SprintScan 4000 Plus and the Coolscan 8000. But yeah, something to consider. Not everything uses USB, unfortunately. At the time when these things are out, the universal part of the USB was, they're still working on it. More things were being added to the list of things that were universal. But scanners, specifically dedicated film scanners, they're a little bit later. Cleaning your film scanner. This is something that I don't think gets talked about enough. If you're looking at getting a older dedicated film scanner, and it will be older, as we established. A lot of these are from the 2000s. Some of them are even from the 1990s. Chances are, unless it's explicitly said that in the listing it's already been cleaned, it's probably not been cleaned since it was purchased. And even if it were clean at some point in between, it's likely been at least a decade since the last one. And this can drastically decrease your scan quality. Before I cleaned my Coolscan 8000, it routinely failed to autofocus on the film. A critical feature of dedicated film scanners. It's kind of one of the things they do. And it's kind of why they're so good at their scannies. They can focus on the image properly. It's pretty good stuff. At any rate, I recently realized that while I did clean my now broken Coolscan 8000, I did not clean the ScanDual 4, and I've never cleaned the Polaroid SprintScan 4000 Plus. And so I cracked those open. And my ScanDual 4 wasn't too hard to crack open, and there's actually a lot of information nowadays on a lot of these older scanners with film kind of coming back. So before you purchase, if you're curious on how to do it, I would say look up the scanner you're about to buy and see if there are instructions online. There may already be some. I'll again put hopefully this description will have a lot of links down to a lot of resources for how you can do some cleanings or do maintenance on your film scanners, because it is pretty important. The ScanDuel 4 actually wasn't too bad when I got it open. I cleaned it off with some rubbing alcohol, Q-tips, and then what's the stuff? Lens cleaner, man, I'm blanking. But I used one of these to clean off the mirror inside the film scanner. Almost all of these dedicated film scanners, I'm pretty sure all of them, will have a mirror arrangement of some sort to bounce light into your CCD line scanner. And that's usually the part that gets really dirty. Sometimes the backlight does get as dirty as well, and you'll need to clean that. But I found for the most part, it's that mirror that sits at a 45-degree angle that dust just accumulates on. Now, I had not cleaned my Sprint Scan 4000 Plus, as I said. And when I did, I was actually shocked at how filthy the mirror was. I actually still have the Q-tip around because I apparently am lazy and have not yet gone around to dumping it in a garbage can. But let's see if I can put it up on screen. It's very... okay. Even though it might not be in focus, hopefully it is, you should get the idea that that Q-tip tip is black. There was so much dust on the mirror that the Q-tip that came out was black. And after I had cleaned it, I did a couple scans and noticed, surprise, surprise, the images came out quite a bit more contrasty. Overall, things generally just look better as well, but the thing that really shot out was the contrast of the scan was much better. So, yay. Yeah, pretty important stuff. And like I said, something that I don't really hear about that often, but it is pretty important. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you're looking at a dedicated film scanner. Okay, so hopefully these tips will help somebody. And again, I will try to collect links to useful resources that I found throughout the journey of going through using dedicated film scanners, because there is quite a pretty vibrant community of people that still use them, and they've kept a lot of knowledge from kind of disappearing. And a lot of it is also just like some useful creative workarounds to some technical issues that I assume when they're making these film scanners, people wouldn't really need to worry about. So in order to also just help keep that from dying, I will again try to put these resources up, get some eyeballs on them, and ensure that they continue getting eyeballs on them, because who knows, one day I'll probably forget where I downloaded my thingies and need to re-download these again. But with that, I want to also discuss camera scanning and why I kind of prefer dedicated film scanning overall. So I've been trying to work on a video, and I think recorded it 2 times now, and both times I've basically decided to scrap the video. And the video is basically what is the camera scanning setup that I would make if I were on a budget. I kind of thought this would be a lot of fun because I've seen a couple other YouTubers do it, and I kind of thought, well, I think I could do that as well, and my solution may be a bit different from theirs. And it was. But it also turns out that when I was using what I thought was my ideal solution for camera scanning on a budget, that I would at least like it more than the film scanner I was intentionally comparing it to. So one of the videos was basically, can I make a camera scanning solution for less money than the PlusTech 8200? It's, I believe, the cheapest new 35mm film scanner you can buy. And it's kind of expensive, but even so, it kind of leaves you with a tight budget to set up a camera scanning rig, if assuming you're scanning or starting from scratch. No camera, no lens, you are basically going to buy everything. That's likely not going to be the case for a lot of people, since if you're considering camera scanning, you probably also already have a camera and you need to just get some other stuff. While going through this process, I realized that I was getting pretty annoyed at camera scanning, especially with the budget I'd given myself. The fact that I had to basically give up a tripod to do it, or buy a dedicated piece of hardware that was kind of large, the copy stand, made me enjoy this a bit less. But it wasn't just that. Going through the images I took with that setup, I realized that in some areas, yes, the camera scan was superior to the 8200i. I think I've already established that it's not my favorite film scanner. There's a lot of stuff that I just don't like about it, from the fact that it doesn't have a motorized film carriage to the fact that it's just really, really slow. But I will admit, when it comes to actual scans, as long as you are okay tweaking the colors in the end, the 8200 does provide nice, pretty sharp scans, especially compared to the scanning rig that I came up with. Again, I was trying to take the budget into pretty strict consideration. And I realized that if I were to, say, put a much more expensive camera on, yes, I would kind of get more of the qualities I was looking for from a dedicated film scan, but then it would dramatically shoot the price up. Or if I was using a camera that could do something like pixel shift photos, so I can get very high resolution, it would also then generally get me to where I would say it's pretty close to a dedicated film camera. Almost said film scammer. That's not a phrase. At any rate, I realized that for all the effort that I was going through to make a camera scanning rig, I really just liked the way the images looked out of my dedicated film scanners. The thing that I really liked about it was kind of being able to just see the graininess of the film. After all, it's kind of why some of us shoot films, why I like it. It's also, I mean, that and the fact that the act of shooting it is also very neat, but being able to see the difference between film and digital images is also one of the reasons why I like it. And I found that was much harder to do on a camera scan. Not that you couldn't tell that it was film, but it just wasn't as nicely recreated. This, I imagine, has a lot of factors in it, and maybe if I had gone with a more modern macro lens, if I'd spent more money on, say, a dedicated macro lens for mirrorless system instead of using adapted EF-L lenses or Nikon lenses or whatnot, the results might have been different. But then at that point, if I'm going to get to the point where I'm both spending enough money to buy a like G Master macro to do pixel shift imagery or buy a very high resolution camera to do so, then wouldn't it serve me better if I just spent that money on a nicer dedicated film scanner? Obviously, with the camera scan, you can pick up your camera and do other camera things, where with the dedicated scanner, you are scanning. That's its one thing. And I admit, yes, that is a pretty big factor for camera scanning. It does other things. You can pick it up, take pictures, enjoy the camera. When you get into dedicated film scanning, that's all it's doing. It's a big brick that's going to be in your room that's going to just do that. But that's the thing. I like that big brick. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. A lot of people are perfectly happy with camera scanning, and honestly, they look pretty good. I generally think for the effort that you put in to set the rig up, the overall speed of camera scanning is fantastic. And generally, the quality is pretty good. but it doesn't, for me, extract the qualities of the film that I personally want. So I don't really use it. And like, for the most part, a lot of my film scanners have come very cheaply. So there's also that as well. The most expensive one being my Coolscan 8000, which I bought more than a decade ago. But even then, I believe what I paid for that is less money than what it would cost now to buy the modern PlusTech 120 film scanner. And I believe it's even less money than the current flatbed scanning solutions of the day. So yeah, dedicated film scanning. I like them. They're great. I understand not everyone does. Not everyone can have one. Not everyone cares to go through the effort to get them to work. So camera scanning is a excellent, viable alternative. And eventually I will probably get to releasing that video. I just got to find a new way to frame it. Because I initially was trying to frame it as my budget camera scanning rig that is as good as, say, the PlusTech 8200. But as I was looking at the images, the sample scans, that just in some ways wasn't true. And it was the ways that I was most concerned with. So yeah, that's that. With that, let's ask question time. Or let's have question time. What do you use for your film scanning? Are you a team camera scan kind of person, team dedicated film scanner, or do you just get lab scans? Let me know in the comments below. But also, before we actually do go, I do want to say, I have been shooting this thing. The Panasonic L1. I really like it. Is it worth all the hype? In some ways, yes. But I'll get into that in another video. Yeah. It's really pretty. Okay, now, with all that said, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe a super thanks if you're into that. Till next time, bye.